Okay, so is the screen good? Is it good? Everyone can see the screen I share? Okay, cool. So today we are gonna go to the third topic. Oh, I forgot to change it. Let me just change it very quick. This is third seminar. Okay, so and we are gonna talk about Greeks and volatility. So in my perspective, volatility is supposed to be like the most interesting thing probably for the whole quantitative finance. And I hope like today I can share more like the more of the intuition instead of more mathematical equation. Like the volatility like itself, it has lots of the intuition behind it and lots of the market phenomenon. It differs from the mathematical equation, and it's very huge and very important in the daily industry. So first of all, like when talk about the volatility, it always reminds me the lecture I took from Marco. He is one of the lecturer in my program, from my program. He is a professor, and in his class, it's called derivative securities. I have no idea what's the name of the class right now, but he talks about volatility, and he said, who is the most sexy lady in the world? And then of course, like nobody answered him. Like the whole class was silence, and then he just continued his own talking. He said, nobody respond. So okay, let's say Lady Gaga is the sexiest lady in the world, and then the volatility is the Lady Gaga in the finance. It's a very bad joke, but I guess it makes the perfect sense. Like what volatility is. To him, volatility is like the most sexiest lady in finance, and of course, it is indeed like one of the most important and the most attractive thing in the financial industry, or at least in the quantitative finance. Most good quants, they all study volatilities, and they have very great research on volatilities. And it's actually a very crucial part, the volatility to price an option, or as a way to hedge, or as a way to invest. So okay, let's go on to this topic. And yes, okay. So if I got something, I will text. So let's talk about last week first. Last week we discussed about the Black-Scholes model. So I don't like Black-Scholes model that much because it's not used in the industry, and then it's probably like the first thing you learn in an option course. So it's like, so when you go to the econ class, the first thing you learn is like the demand and supply curve. And then when you go to accounting class, you learn something like asset is equal to liability plus shareholders equity. And this is like the same in option class. Black-Scholes model is the first thing you learn. And it's actually something very theoretical, something outdated, I would say. But in today, the Black-Scholes model are still probably being used, but not as a pricing function, but as a way to calculate first the Greeks. If you have no idea what is the Greeks, we will explain like in 1 second. Or it can be used to calculate the implied volatility. That's also the topic that we will discuss today. So the reason the Black-Scholes model is nice is because for an European option, using the Black-Scholes model, you have a closed form solution. When I say closed form solution, it's like an equation like this. It's something like you have the spot, you have the strike, time to maturity, interest rate. And the volatility, you just plug into the equation and then use a calculator, you can get an answer. You can probably not do this by hand, but you can definitely do this with TI-84, with Python, or with a computer. So that's why we call it a closed form solution. The nice thing about a closed form solution is first, you can calculate the derivative. As we all know, the derivative is you can calculate the derivative like violently. Like you spend hours, you will definitely get the right answer of the derivative. So for a call option, we can price it in this formula. For a put option, we can price in the second formula. And then if we want to calculate the first derivative of a call option to spot price, we just take the derivative of to S. And then we can go through this whole equation, use some chain rule, use some product rule, and eventually everyone will be able to get an answer of the first derivative of a call option to spot. So this is a nice thing about the Black-Scholes model, because through this closed form solution, all the Greeks, all the sensitivities, or we can say all the first derivative and the second derivatives, they can be calculated manually in a closed form manner. So that's why like the Black-Scholes model is so nice, because it allows us to calculate the Greeks in a closed form also. That's the first thing. The second greatest thing about the Black-Scholes model is I mentioned about the implied volatility, and the implied volatility is like, so like in the daily trading, most of the time we can see some options being traded in the market, but we actually do not know the volatility behind. So if we say we are trading the Microsoft stock, and then we see if you have Robinhood, you can definitely go on Robinhood and you can see there are options being traded, and you can see there's a strike. Let's say the strike is 100 and it has an option price, but you have no idea what is the volatility behind. In this case, we can inversely use the Black-Scholes model. So instead of use volatility to calculate the option price, we can use the option price and the Black-Scholes model to inversely calculate the volatility. And this is what we call the implied volatility. And that is why the Black-Scholes model is so huge, because it can give us an equation. So like if we know the option price, we know the spot, we know the maturity, strike, interest rate, it's like a rule finding algorithm. We just find the only unknown here is the volatility. We just find a root to solve the equation, and then we got the volatility, the sigma. This only applies to European models who are using Black-Scholes model to calculate IB. Yes. So this formula, the Black-Scholes formula, only applies to European. Yes. So if it's an American option, it's definitely more frustrating to calculate the implied volatility, but it can be solved in a similar manner, but just way more calculation. For example, the Black-Scholes model, we have a closed form, so to calculate the volatility is easier. We will discuss the reason later. But if it's American option, we can still do some searching algorithm, like bisective search, other numerical method, but it will be more complicated and does not use the Black-Scholes model. And the Black-Scholes model, again, it only applies to European option. For American option, it doesn't have a closed form solution. Okay, so this was last week. And then also from last week, something that is very crucial, I would just want to refresh everyone again. Factors that affect the option price. That's our first, the spot price. Second, the strike. Third, time to maturity. The fourth one, interest rate. And last, volatility. So these 5 factors, they affect the option price. And then when we talk about the Greeks are the sensitivity of option on these 5 factors. So let's go to the next slide. The first one, the delta. Delta is the first derivative of a call option or put option to the spot price. Here's a typo here, but this is supposed to be the P. This is the delta. That's the first derivative, or the first Greek I want to introduce to everyone. It's the first derivative. And by the way, my notation here, like this is like mean the partial derivative of a call option to spot price. It's the same thing as like DC over DS, but just another way to do the notation. And then for a call option, the delta is always, it's a number from 0 to 1. And then for a put, it's a number from -1 to 0. So if we think in the call option, first thing is definitely non-negative, the value of the delta of a call. The reason is, think in this way, the spot price goes up. It's a happy thing if you own a call option. right? So because the call option, its payoff is the maximum S minus K or 0. So if the stock price goes up, you are more likely to make some money. So the delta of a call option is definitely positive. And then it's from 0 to 1. And the reason is, let's think about like, so this is the graph of the delta of a call option. Let's think about this area first. So we call this area in the money area, ITM, and we will talk more about what is ITM and what is OTM, ATM in later, like in like 30 minutes maybe. Think about this ITM area. The stock price is very high, and then we write out the call option. The payoff is S minus K or 0. The plus sign here means the plus sign here is the same thing as like putting the max. Okay, so this is the meaning of the plus sign. It's like another notation for the max function. So the call option has this payoff. So when it's deep in the money or like this red area, it's like saying I'm guaranteeing to exercise the option. It's guaranteeing to give me some money. It will, because it's definitely worthy to get to buy the option with the strike price K. As it's guaranteed, so it's like saying that this function is approximately the same thing as S minus K if S is very large. So you see, like if it's approximately S minus K, then if you take the first derivative to S, it's just 1. And that's why, like in this area, the deep in the money area, the first derivative, the delta, it converges to 1. And then if we think the deep out of money area, this is the out of money area, it's 0. It's for the same reason. Because as it's S minus K or 0, in this area, the deep out of money area is saying it's guaranteed this option doesn't mean anything. It will give me nothing. It will guarantee a 0 payoff at the maturity. In this case, no matter how the spot price changes, the option price will have no impact. It's always 0 because it's guaranteed that like it's useless. In this case, it has a 0 delta because the option price doesn't change, remain at 0. And the same idea applies to the put option. And then you can do the same logic because the put option, you want the spot price to drop. So that's why like the delta goes like here is -1, here is 0. If you go through the same logic, you will see it's the same thing. And then for call and put, the delta has such a relationship. The delta of delta C minus delta P is equal to 1. And then one thing that when I was probably the first year of my master's program, I was thinking, so the delta of a call option, it goes very high in this area and goes small in this area. So I was thinking like maybe, okay, so everyone knows like the options leveraged. So I was thinking like probably this area or this area, like which area is more leveraged. And I thought it was this area like at the very beginning, but actually no. The reason I saw is this area because when the spot price goes up, the option price changes a lot in this area. But if the spot price goes down in this area, it doesn't change anything. I saw like the right side area, the option is more leveraged than the left side, but it's actually wrong. Like this area is more leveraged. The blue area is more leveraged than the red area for a call option. Although the red area, when the stock price changes, the option price changes more numerically or absolute value speaking, it changes more. But percentage-wise, the blue area, it changes more. So it's actually the blue area that is giving more leverage because the blue area, the options, they are cheap. Okay, so if like the option price is 1, it goes up by 1, it's like 100% increase. But in the red area, if the option price is, let's say it's 10, if it goes up by 5, it's only like 50% change. Although like absolute value wise, the red area changes more, but percentage wise, the blue area changes more. And we all know, like in the stock market, we care about the percentage changes. So that's why the blue area is actually more leveraged. So if you are thinking about buying some option on Robinhood, please consider this, because otherwise you will lose probably tons of money if you buy the wrong option. Or maybe another way, if you buy the wrong option, it may gives you actually more profit than you expected. See one question in the okay, why does the put start at -1? So if we think this slowly, the put option, the delta is negative. The reason is one, so thinking this way, like the put option, the first thing, when the stock price goes up, is K minus S is something approximate. So this option becomes approximately K minus S. If you take the first derivative of this to S, you get -1. Okay, so so I think to explain this, the first thing is when you are holding a put option, you want the stock price to go down. That's the first. Second, when the stock price goes up, you lose money. So the delta is always negative. That's the first thing. Second, when it's like more like deeper in the money, it changes more. Okay, let's talk about the second Greek, the gamma. So besides the delta is like the shape of delta is like a logistic function. It's like the L shape or the S shape. And the other Greeks, most of the Greeks, they're all like this, like the bell shape. The gamma is the gamma is the second derivative of the option to the underlying. And then this is S and this is P. Okay, so of the stock price to underlying, and then measures the curvature. So the reason I'm still putting the delta graph here is because this is so the gamma is the first derivative of delta. So if we look at the delta here, we see like the magnitude of change, it gets slower like in this area on the two edges. Like this area, the magnitude of change of delta is getting small. So this gives these two areas a 0 value. And then this area, the slope is highest, like it's changing the most of the delta is changing the most. It corresponds, let's use the blue color here, and it corresponds to like this peak. So visually speaking, delta, the gamma is the derivative of delta. So like visually speaking, these two graphs, they connect with each other, and that's why I'm putting them all together here. And then the second thing about the gamma is the gamma of, so if we say we have two options, a call and a put, they have the same structure. Their gamma should be equal if we don't consider the interest rate. Even if we consider the interest rate, the difference will be very small or even trivial. So you can like intuitively think the gamma is like the same for a call option and put option. When I say two option with the same structure, I mean two option with the same time to maturity. same strike, and definitely the same underlying. So that's what I mean by the same structure. And this can be easily be proved by the book of parity. So we last week we talked about C minus K is equal to S minus K. This is the book of parity. If we take the first derivative, so we have ds C minus ds P is equal to, I'm just gonna go slow here, ds minus ds K. And then the right-hand side, this just becomes 1, and that becomes 0. So if we calculate the second derivative, the gamma of C minus the gamma of a put, it becomes 0. So that's why I'm saying the gammas, they are equal. So yeah, so this can be easily be derived from the book of parity. And then maybe we can save this later. The next is the theta. And then this is probably the only negative, or besides the delta put, this is the only negative Greeks. And then the theta is the, I copy paste everything, that's why like I mess up the notation all here. And then the theta of the option is always negative. And then for the same reason, the book of parity, the theta of call and put, they are the same, or almost the same. And then the reason it's negative, or intuitively thinking this way, theta is the option price to time to maturity. When the option has a long maturity, it means possibility. So whenever think about time, it's like the possibility for your option to finish in the money. So if the option is already in the money, but let's don't use it in the money at this moment, since this is I haven't introduced this term yet. So when I say possibility, it means the option will be able to bring profit. When I say bring profit for a call option, it means S greater than K. Okay, so when the time is long, it's more likely for S to be greater than K. If S is already greater than K, if the time is long, S has more opportunity to even greater than K, so to make even more money. So that's why like the time to maturity is always negative, because when the time gets closer and closer to the maturity, you are losing the opportunity. Or maybe in a more professional way to say this is you are losing your time value. Okay, so that's why the theta is negative. So maybe you will ask me that, okay, so it's true that if I have a long time, it's possible to finish in the money, or it's possible to make a profit. But if you are already in a profiting position, if we have long time to maturity, probably it will finish, or probably the S will goes down and gives you no profit. It's true that it's possible, like if we have a long time to maturity and we are now profiting from the option, it's true that maybe after a year when the option matures, we actually, the option will get to a out of money position, or to a position that we don't want to exercise the option. It's true. But because the option, the payoff is X minus K or 0. It's like saying our loss is it has a lower floor, it's floored. The most we can lose after we buy the option, we have already paid the option. The maximum we can lose is we don't gain anything, it's 0. You see, because this thing is always greater or equal to 0. So after we have already buy the option, the maximum, the worst case scenario for the option holder, the call option holder, is he gains nothing. So that's the worst case scenario. But the best case scenario is S goes super high. Okay, so you see like the payoff of an option is not symmetric. So the loss is floored, it's bounded, but the profit is not. So that's why it's as because it's not a symmetric payoff. Time value is always a positive thing for option because as the time is longer, you have infinity possibility to make a lot of money. And the worst case scenario is you don't get anything and the option just expire and it's zero. It's floored. It's not symmetric. So that's why like time value is always a good thing. And theta is always negative. But actually, theta is not always negative, but for European vanilla option, it's always negative. And I don't want to go deeper like into more details of when the theta is positive. So you can see like in this small area, it's I'm actually not 100% sure if it's positive here, but this little area is possible to be positive. Why does the theta spike at a strike? It's a good question. So I do have a mathematical equation and mathematical explanation that's in the next slide. But I feel like mathematical answer is not always the best. Maybe more intuitively thinking this way is or maybe let's still like think about like the possibility wise. If we are in this area, I don't think it's related to Gaussian movement for the theta. So maybe we can think it this way, like for this red area, even if our time to maturity is very huge, it's like saying the possibility we still want the volatility or we still want the time value, but the time value or the possibility is still like very trivial. So that's why like even if we think that the possibility is a good thing, but it's actually gives us very trivial profit. So that's why like the theta is zero here. And for the same reason, like in this area, because we already like we are making lots of the S minus K or zero. We are already making lots of the profit in this area. And then the profit that the possibility of increase is like, okay, because I'm already making money, like it's just saying like it's guaranteeing making money. But on the other hand, this area, or we say the at the money area, we have no idea whether it will make money or the option will expire. And then the possibility is like more important here. If it goes up, it will give me like lots of profit. If it goes down, it will give me nothing. So it's like on the edge, I don't know like how to say that or maybe feel it. Like it's the most exciting area because you are actually making the bet. You don't know whether it's going up or it's going down. It's like the most volatile area for the option price. So I don't know if this intuitively makes sense, but if we go to the next page, we can see some mathematical explanation. So the first line, so let's stick with the y is spike, y is spikes. Maybe, so let's answer the theta spikes at the money area. Let's explain that first before we go deeper into these equations. We can see like this equation first. Theta and the gamma, they are negatively correlated. So which means the gamma is spikes at the money, and then that's also the reason that theta spikes at the money. But this is like I say it's like cheating because this is a mathematical explanation. It's not very intuitive, but mathematically we can use this relationship to explain why spikes. Okay, and then as we just say, theta and the gamma, they are negatively correlated, and this is actually a very important trade-off. So gamma is also a little bit smaller, but gamma and the Vega, they are, you can think gamma and the Vega the same thing. So when we say we trade the volatility, it's like the same thing as we say we trade a gamma. So on the other hand, it's saying like when the option, we all like volatility and we like time. But as the option as the underlying is like moving, is doing some vibrating, and we were like, okay, the volatility is going high and the option is going crazy. The stock is going crazy and we are super exciting at the moment, and the option price goes up. But at the same time, as the option gets closer to the maturity, there's also a negative force that is dragging the option price down. So every time when the volatility is going up, but because the time is going closer to the maturity, there's like a trade-off in here. We all like the volatility, but because when the option or when the stock price is moving, it gets closer to maturity because time goes on. And then the theta brings a negative effect to the option. So this is what we say like the trade-off between gamma and theta. And how this equation, how this relation is derived, I also want to show you here, but because this goes pretty mathematical. So the first one, it's the what we call the Black-Scholes PDE. So previously we introduced the Black-Scholes pricing formula, and this one is the partial differential equation for the Black-Scholes model. It means the same thing as my first page, the closed form solution. If you solve this equation, if you solve this PDE, you will get the same answer as the first page with boundary condition. And this is equivalent as, because the first one, the dt pi, so the pi here can be either call or put. Dt pi is the theta, and then ds pi is the delta, and then this is the gamma. So we can resolve the Black-Scholes PDE into the Greek form, theta, delta, gamma. So this is like the Black-Scholes, the Greek form of the Black-Scholes form. And then we know the R, the risk-free rate or the interest rate, is very, very small. It's close to 0. So we can actually ignore these two parts. We call it 0 because it's too small. And then we can see the theta and the gamma, it has the negative relation here. And this is what we call the trade-off. Okay, and then the next one, the last Greeks is the Vega. And the Vega is, as I mentioned, because of Vega and the gamma is basically somehow the same thing. This can be proved by the Black-Scholes equation. So if you take, if you are very bored and you want to take the derivative of C, you can try to take the derivative of C regards to sigma. You can try to take the second derivative of C regards to S, and then you will see the gamma and the Vega is like very close. They have very close form, and that's why like you can see the shape. This is Vega shape. This is Vega shape, I promise you, and this is the gamma shape. It's like almost identical. I didn't copy the same picture, but they are actually very the same. And then Vega is the sensitivity to the volatility, and it's actually something very important. And then another thing about Vega is in daily trading life, at least like in the group I work on, when we are calculating the initial margin, we don't look at the Vega, we only look at the gamma, because gamma and the Vega, they can be calculated. If you know the gamma, you know the Vega. So that's in my case, like my work. When we look at the sensitivity, I actually don't see the gamma, I only see the Vega, and that's enough. And that's a reason, because Vega and the gamma, they are correlated. And another fun fact about the Vega is because those we call the Greeks, but the Vega is actually not a Greek. And it's always frustrating for me to type Vega, If you know how to type Vega on LaTeX or anything, please let me know, because every time I type Vega, this is actually not Vega, I type new. So it's actually, I cheated here, as new is not Vega, but it's a fun fact about Vega because we call it Greeks, but it's actually not Greek. Oh, and then another thing is how these Greeks are named is because this is so if the delta, because it measures like the first derivative to spot, it's like the first thing comes to the mind, so we use a delta, and delta is like it measures the change. Like intuitively, when you talk about delta, you think about the change, and then that's why it's the first Greek. The first Greek letter is to spot, and when we talk about theta, it's to time. That's why it picks the Greek that starts with T. So we use theta. People actually like name it like in this way, so it's easier to remember because theta is to the time to maturity to time. So it starts with T, and we pick the letter theta. And Vega, because it's to volatility, so we pick the letter, although it's not Greek letter, starts with V. So we use Vega. And then I have never learned Greeks. Maybe I mean I have never learned Greek, the language. If someone knows Greek, probably can tell us if there is a letter starts with V. However, there is no letter starts with V, and that's why the quants picked the Vega as a letter, and it's fake. It's not Greek, but we call it Greek. And last one, the rho. And then rho, as I mentioned, is for the same rule because it's to interest rate. And the interest rate, we use the letter R, and that's why they use a rho, starts with R. And then for the rho, set, nobody cares because the change of the interest rate is too trivial compared to other stuff. And then for two reasons. First, the change itself of the interest rate is small. Second, the interest rate, the value is too small to be considered. So we do have the fifth Greek rho, but nobody cares. Okay, after the Greeks, we can go to the most exciting part, the Lady Gaga of finance, the volatility. So we did discuss about the geometric boundary motion, and we see the sigma is like we call it the volatility. But what exactly is volatility? The first thing I want to say about volatility is it has no directionality. So on the right side, you can see three lines, maybe they're stocks. And then these three lines, they have the same sigma, and the sigma is the volatility. And the mu here is the drift, okay? So the first one, the drift is positive. Second one, the drift is 0. The third one, drift is negative. So you can see the blue line goes up, the red line relatively stable, the red line goes down in the trend. And the magnitude, the vibrate is the same, okay? So how much they vibrate is like what the volatility measures. And then all these three have the same volatility, but the direction, it can go everywhere. It can go up, it can remain the same level, it can go down. So first, volatility has nothing to do with the directionality. Second, volatility, it measures like how vibrate the motion is. We can see like the yellow line is like vibrating like very crazily. And then the blue line is relatively stable, and the red one like in between. And then we can see the corner. Definitely the yellow one, it has the largest volatility. Then the blue one, the most stable one, has the smallest volatility. Then this one is like more visual. It gives you the idea of what is the volatility, how it changes the move of the stock price. And mathematically, we have lots of different kinds of volatility. And the first one I want to introduce is what we call the historical volatility, or probably we can call it the realized volatility. Historical volatility is the standard deviation or the sample standard deviation of historical return. So it's just the formula for sample standard deviation. And if we have a stock, we collect 100 data points, 100 days maybe, we have their return. And it's a time series, and then we just simply calculate, also the alpha here is the mean of the return. And then we simply calculate the sample standard deviation. And then that is the historical volatility. But naturally speaking, people will annualize the volatility. So after you calculate this is like the volatility for 1 day. And then we divided it by root 252 to get the annualized volatility. So that's just the way it is, because it's more natural for people more willing to see the yearly number, because daily number is just too small. And the yearly number, it can be like something like 10%, 20%, 30%. It's easier to see. And then the implied volatility gets to the fun part here. We have already discussed at the very beginning, I have already introduced. And then the implied volatility is basing the most natural way to do it is based on the Black-Scholes formula. So as I mentioned, the Black-Scholes formula, it has a closed form. And then we can inversely apply the Black-Scholes formula. So assume we know the call price, we know the spot price, we know the strike, time to maturity, and interest rate. We just solve the equation, and then to find the sigma that would make the original equation satisfy, that will make it satisfy the Black-Scholes pricing formula. And then this is the implied volatility. It's implied from the market data. And then how we solve this, the best method is Newton integration. It's a numerical method. I don't know if you have already studied it or not, but Newton integration is a rule finding algorithm. So we have this equation, and then we solve for the sigma, like based on the Newton integration. And then the reason, and then one requirement for Newton integration is we need to calculate the first derivative, or in other words, we need to calculate the Vega in order to do the Newton integration. And then the Black-Scholes formula is good because, as I mentioned, there is a closed form for the Vega. So everything like can be calculated in an O1 minor. And then on the other hand, just as I forgot who asked the question, Nabil, I think. If I'm sorry if I pronounce the name wrong, but if it's a miracle option, the Vega cannot be calculated in a closed form. In this case, we might use some other numerical method. So first, because the Vega is not, it doesn't have a closed form, but we still can calculate the Vega in numerical method. That is what we call the sigma method to do the iteration. It's like the alternative way of doing Newton method, but using numerical method to calculate the Vega instead of using a closed form to calculate the Vega. Or maybe we can use bisection search to find the root. But anyway, it's another story. And then the implied volatility. Before talking more about implied volatility, finally, I should definitely introduce this earlier, but I put it here. Sorry about that. All the money, at the money, in the money. These are three very important terms if you want to talk about options. So when we talk about the in the money, it's talk for a call option. We are actually talking about the area where the stock price is greater than K. So it's like the area that I think more intuitively is like the area we're making the money. And then at the money is like the break-even point where the spot is equal to the strike. And the out of the money is where the spot is smaller than the strike. And then the reason I put it here is if we think about the option price, we normally call it option price is equal to the intrinsic value plus the extrinsic value. And the intrinsic value is the maximum of ST minus K0. So it's like if at this moment, the option matures, the value I will be able to get, that's the intrinsic value. And then the intrinsic value for an out of the money option is 0. But for an in-the-money option, the intrinsic value is ST minus K. In other words, for OTM option, it only has extrinsic value. It doesn't have the intrinsic one because the intrinsic one is 0. So that's why the OTM option gives only exposure to the extrinsic value. And the extrinsic value comes from the time value, comes from the possibility that we talk again and again. It comes from the volatility. And then when talk about the time value, another little digression here is the time value is like the value comes from the volatility and time. Although it's called time value, but volatility plays a big part here. Because there is volatility, then the time is valuable, or put it this way. And then if you go to the Black-Scholes pricing formula, you will see that the sigma and the tau, it always comes together. There's always the sigma root t. This is like the root t is like, so like these two together is actually like is the standard deviation or the variance that we care about. So they always come together. And then back to the topic, the extrinsic value is like the volatility. So for the out of the money option, since their intrinsic value is 0, it has exposure only to the extrinsic value or only to the volatility. That's why, like, when volatility changes, the out of the money option is more sensitive to volatility changes, and that's why traders cares about the out of the money option more than the in the money option, because OTM option gives investor or trader a better exposure to volatilities. And for volatilities traders, they trade the OTM option. They don't care about the ITM option. And that's the first reason OTM option is more popular. And the second reason the OTM option is more popular is because OTM option, they are cheaper. Because for ITM option, the ST minus K is like a large part, and it's actually a significant value. But OTM is 0, so it's cheap. And there is a third reason that the OTM option is more valuable, and I will just explain in a very second. So the next question I would ask is, if we select an underlying, if we say Microsoft, and we fix a time to maturity, how would the implied volatility surface look like? So if we want to construct a graph, the x-axis is strike, the y is the implied volatility. How would this curve look like? The question is it gonna be flat? So if we go back to the Black-Scholes model, like one of the assumptions we had is saying that the volatility is, we assume it to be constant. But I have already like talked 2 weeks ago, like it's not the case for the real industry. Volatility is not a constant in the no matter you regard into what circumstances, just never a constant. But the Black-Scholes model assumes that. And in the real market, it's not. So this curve, like this, is too like naive. It's like too theoretical or even romantic. Only romantic person will like draw a straight line here maybe. And then the answer is the curve will be look something like this. Yes, a parabolic, So this is how it's look like. If you are saying like it's gonna be like a second degree polynomial, it's not the exact answer, but it's a very close guess. Okay, so this graph is from my final project 1 year ago, and then all these points are from the real market. It's Microsoft, and we have different option price, and we calculate the implied volatility. And by the way, this curve is actually the points are all collected from American option instead of European one. And then the first thing we notice is not flat, okay? And second thing we notice it's not symmetric. So this graph is probably not very, let's say, very, the asymmetric is probably not too obvious, but probably we can see like here is 140, and then somewhere here is 110, so it's like 30. So like the 80 here, you see like right-hand side is probably, it's hard to say like from this graph to be honest, but if we look like deeper, like into the end, the left side is definitely higher than the right side. The first question, why are these points flat? It's because one, it goes very deep out of the money area, or like when it goes like very deep to the left or the right side, it's not very liquidable. And the one is not liquidable, it means like nobody trades options, so it doesn't get a good stock price. I mean the option price. So that's why like they are not reflecting the real market belief on these points. So these points are not good. But you can see like the left side, these options, they are more liquidable than the right-hand side. And this part is the put. This part is the call. Oh, I forgot to mention this, but when we calculate this volatility surface, the option we use is we use OTM options. Okay, so like if this is the ATM area, the left side we use put, the right side we use call. Because as I mentioned, we discussed the OTM option, they reflect the volatility better. And then we can see like although like they are very deep out of the money, the left side is still more liquidable than the right side. People are still very willing to buy the out of the money put, but less people are willing to buy the out of the money call. The reason is investors are willing to use the out of the money put as an insurance. So for example, because first, the out of money put is like very cheap. It was like several dollars depending on the stock, but it was like very, very cheap compared to stock price. It can be even like less than $1 for one contract. But in this case, when you spend like several dollars or hundreds of dollars to hedge, if the stock, like one day the financial crisis comes like tomorrow, because of the guarantee or the insurance you buy, you won't lose any money. So that's why like investors, because they are risk averse sometimes, not always, they are willing to buy the out of the money put. And they are willing to spend more money to buy the out of the money put. And this makes the out of money put first more liquidable. So you see like this area, it still shows some the volatility changes, but the right side is just a flat dots because nobody is trading them. That's first, the out of money put, they are more liquidable. More people are willing to buy them. Second, more people are willing to pay more to buy the put. Because as I mentioned, they are cheap. If the option is only like $1 for one contract, and you can use one contract to hedge like a lot of shares of stocks, why not just pay a little bit more to buy the contract since it's cheap and I'm willing to use this money to buy this insurance. I know it's probably not probability wise, probably it's not ideal, but practical wise, I don't care if I lose like $200 or $300 at this moment, but it can guarantee me not to lose millions of dollars in the future. So that's why like investors, they are very willing to buy this deep out of money put as an insurance. And this first makes the curve more skewed. That's the term we want to use, is a skewed, because the left side is more like it's higher than the right hand side. And second, the ATM side is the volatility is the lowest. And this is actually a very, very huge phenomenon of the volatility surface. And lots of the quant, their job is to figure out a way to model this curve. There are actually many different ways, and then some ways using us curve, some ways like to use some equation to modify this curve, or through some what we call local volatility process. It's a way deeper topic. I still have several slides, but I think I will leave it for next seminar because it's already 8:30. Is there any question I can answer before we end today? I okay. Yes, we will use some numerical method. So for example, delta is equal to, it's just like the simple, like from the definition, if we want to calculate the derivative of f to x, we just do like this. This is like how we numerically calculate the derivatives. And then it's also like how we calculate the American option, the Greeks, or some even more exotic option, the Greeks. This is how we calculated them. We increase the spot price a very small amount, and then we get the option price. And then we minus our original option price, and then we divide it by the small increment that we did. So this is like the simple numerical method that we will use to numerically calculate the American or even more exotic option. There are Greeks. Yes, that's correct. And then one of the biggest concern that when we calculate the Greeks numerically, because the option, the vanilla European option, the Black-Scholes formula, it's a continuous function that's smooth enough for us to calculate the derivatives to second degree. But for exotic option, depending on how exotic it could be, there might be some issue on the discontinuity. And I will say the main workhorse is not like how good the pricing model, or more importantly, is like how efficient is the pricing model. When I say efficient, is it quick, and at the same time is it accurate. There's always a trade-off. The method can be extremely accurate, but it can be extremely slow. So if we are using some PDE, so for example, the small increment, like how small is the increment? If we pick the increment to be machine epsilon, like it's the smallest number in the computer, you might be able to get a very exact value for the option, but the calculation might be extremely slow and it's not worth it. It might take an hour, and when you trade the option, your client wastes you for like several minutes. So yeah, so it's like a trade-off. So I would say like how accurate is the pricing model and how fast is the pricing model. So like the efficient is the key. Not familiar with the backwardation. Sorry. I will skip this question at this moment, but I can do a research in my free time, and maybe I can answer it next week. Yeah, PDE and the finite differential is definitely one of the industry way to do the pricing, but it's Not my personal favorite, probably because although I'm from NYU, but my PDE is not good enough. Or maybe because I'm from NYU, so I think that my PDE is not good enough because there are so many professors are just like the best PDE mathematicians. And then my personal favorite method is definitely Monte Carlo. It's like a numerical method, which I will discuss more like in next seminar or the next one or the one after the next one. Because Monte Carlo is more like intuitively way easier to understand comparing to PDE. And then PDE, because there's when you do finite difference, there's tons of very huge matrix calculation, and it's actually very time consuming. And then Monte Carlo, and then another good thing about Monte Carlo is you can do options. You can do lots of options at the same time. You can price tons of options at the same time. Tons of options of different underlying on the same time. And you do one Monte Carlo simulation one time, and then that's like for everything. And then, yeah, that's why I like Monte Carlo. Okay, so I will say this for today. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming.